Welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. In the next 30 minutes, I will dissect China-related stories from around the world and discuss with international guests to bring you the missing pieces of the China puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us a comment or question via the CGTN page on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. If you're watching us online or via the CGTN app, email us. We'll be live streaming at 10:30 a.m. Beijing time every Friday. So get in touch and we might just read out your comments on the show. Now, our headline story today, the Essex lorry death. On October 23rd, 39 people were found dead in a refrigerated truck in Grays in the United Kingdom, a small industrial town in Essex located around 20 miles to the east of London. The trailer had been shipped from the port of Zeebrugge in Belgium, though Belgian authorities have concluded that it is unlikely that the victims entered the lorry there. Now, if this proves to be the case, the victims would have been trapped inside the lorry for at least 10 hours. Essex police are leading the investigation into this tragedy with the assistance of the National Crime Agency, who is responsible for dealing with organized crime, including human trafficking. Well, the story has been covered intensely there in the UK, while also making headlines around the world. While most people remain shocked and saddened by the tragedy, some UK media have used the event to speculate about the, quote, Chinese regime and their reasons for fleeing, even before the identity of the victims have been confirmed. And some foreign journalists went even further, raising questions to the spokesperson at the Chinese Foreign Ministry, saying, well, asking why would people want to leave China to watch in such a risky manner? And of course, in the wake of such events, people and journalists speculate about their situation and the circumstances there. There has also been conjecture and mistruths on Chinese social media. So this should be a lesson to us all about how to act in a timely and responsible way. But this tardiness was most notable in the international media. So first, let's take a look at the official statements there released by the Essex police on Thursday, October 24th, the day after the bodies were first discovered. It says, we have since confirmed the 8 of the deceased are women and 31 are men, and all are believed to be Chinese nationals. While the police make clear that they are still trying, they're still in the process of confirming the identities of the deceased, the media instantly seized upon it, started to report that those who died were Chinese. And now, take a look at the article published by The Guardian on October 24th. Essex lorry deaths, all 39 victims were Chinese nationals. Now, this article was published the same day Essex police said they believed the 39 victims were Chinese national, clearly and wrongly declares that those who died were unequivocally Chinese. Now, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has said the British police are working against the clock to verify the victims, but currently they are not able to confirm their nationalities. But headlines does not accurately reflect the police statement. Why would journalists choose to not properly report the facts? This is a very distressing and sensitive issue, and such oversights makes one wonder what other facts they choose to interpret rather than report. Now, the term believed to be is a common phrase by Western journalists. I understand that journalists have to report the news often without all the facts available, but in this case, police statement was carefully curated to avoid offering any kind of explicit confirmation. Now, for The Guardian, and many others too, to make this small but significant change to the story seems highly irresponsible. A day later, on Friday the 25th, the Essex police gave an update, which read, we gave an initial steer on Thursday on nationality. However, this is now a developing picture. And as such, I will not be drawn on any further detail until formal identification processes approved by Her Majesty's coroner have taken place. They also specifically asked journalists who are making speculation, saying, I strongly urge journalists and people on social media not to speculate about the identities of those involved or the circumstances surrounding this investigation. But following this, there were no retraction or correction of earlier statements. Coverages on the lorry story continued to dominate British headlines over the course of the next few days. The guesswork and the speculation, which had already begun, now seemed to be in full swing. Take a look at this clip from BBC's flagship political analysis show, Newsnight.
How hard? Now, we think, but we've had absolutely no absolute confirmation. I'm not sure how we would get the confirmation at this stage that these are Chinese nationals. But just let's say they're Chinese nationals. Just let's say they come from a regime, perhaps, where even the very fact of their escape is problematic for the family. If somebody's missing, it's not necessarily the case that with deaths, the relatives would necessarily want to come forward.
The journalist you were watching there was Kirsty Work, one of Britain's most recognizable faces in TV news. Now, she has worked at the BBC for over 2 decades and is highly experienced. Yet despite this, listen to her off-the-cuff connection between the victims of this terrible tragedy and the Chinese government. She speculates that if they are Chinese, that they must come from a, quote, regime, and that if they are Chinese, their families would be too fearful to come forward and report them missing. What authority does Work have to make this assumption? And what evidence is she basing these wild accusations? Well, she also prefaces her comments with, let's just say. Now, let's just say, even admitting herself that this triad against China is nothing but mere conjecture, she also said, we've had absolutely no absolute confirmation when referencing the nationalities of those souls who perished in the lorry. So what gives her the right to launch an attack on China, speculating about the reasons they might have wanted to leave? And even if they do indeed turn out to be Chinese, the reasons for doing so are innumerable. Yet the journalist doesn't refrain from jumping to her own conclusions. Now, the BBC wasn't the only one to spawn speculation about why the victims might have fled China if indeed they were Chinese at all. CNN published a long article with a deceptive and misleading headline. It read, "Why would people from China, the world's second biggest economy, risk their lives to enter the UK?" Now, the article goes into great details to highlight the rise of China and its economic expansion. It goes on to say nearly 10 million of the international migrant population of 258 million are Chinese citizens, according to the Migration Policy Institute, making China the 4th largest country of origin for international migrants. While this information is correct and even interesting, migrants are not illegal immigrants who are looking to flee their motherland. There are those who have acquired skills and want to start a new life somewhere else for a myriad of reasons, perhaps because they have a partner from a different country or their set of skills is desirable in different parts of the world. So this headline paints a lurid picture of China, implying that the country must be so bad they're willing to risk their lives to reach the UK. In fact, the article is analysis of legal migration, quite a different matter, wouldn't you agree? And according to data from the Ministry of Science and Technology of China, 950,000 foreigners now work in China since 2018, and these are legal migrants who have chosen to live here, just like the Chinese quoted in the CNN article who lived abroad. So where is the article wondering what's so bad about their respective countries that they decided to leave? And finally, I'd like to say, no matter where they're from, this is a tragic event and should draw international attention to the issue of illegal migration. So no matter if these people turn out to be Chinese, Vietnamese, or indeed any other nationality, it's never okay to use such an event to target a country, China, or otherwise, in the wake of such a terrible event. So what do you think? Drop us a comment or send us your questions. Let me know what you think. We'll talk about it when we come back with my guests. Stick around.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference. Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. Today we're talking about the Essex lorry deaths and how China has become a target in the process of investigation. And joining us on the set are Ms. Han Hua, Research Fellow from Chongyang Institute, Renmin University of China. Welcome. And Harvey Zoden, Senior Fellow from Center for China and Globalization. And last but not least, Mr. Edward Lehman, Managing Director, Lehman, Lee and Xu LLP. Thank you so much for being here. So let's talk about this. You've earlier heard some of the articles that I've picked out there from The Guardian, the BBC, CNN. I mean, these are highly respected news outlets. A lot of people in this industry do look up to them and their high standard. But what happened this time? The reports, they are massively inaccurate. Is this just poor work? Or trying to get more clicks, or is there an agenda? Let me start with you, Edward.
You know, I think there's an agenda, definitely. I think there's built-in bias. I mean, it used to be, and Harvey and I are of the generation that we knew that when you opened up a newspaper, which is what we sort of started with, where op-ed started, was clearly identified which was the opinion part of the newspaper, and that which was supposed to be fact-based. And now there's a blurring of the lines with new technology, with 24/7 news cycles. But I also think that the administration within these organizations also have an agenda, and it becomes very difficult for the public to discern. So, I mean, journalism has kind of been eliminated or vitiated, watered down by opinion. And yeah, I do think that they do have an agenda, and there's no question about it, and they're looking for clicks. Remember that in 2000, print media was generated 46.6 billion US dollars. Now it's gone down to about 7 billion US dollars, and the online stuff is only accounting for about 3.6 billion dollars with regards to money that's generated from advertisements, which is far below that $46 billion number in in a very short period of time. But I also think that the public is skeptical, just like we are today, about a lot of the stuff that's coming onto the media, even with what was considered the stalwart of the foundational medias, like we're talking about. I don't know if CNN ever qualified for that, but I mean, it's a way. But I do think they have an agenda, and I think it's fairly evident that it's a little bit like Winston Churchill said, you know, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its boots on. And so this is a clear example of that, and I think that they're trying to mix some things up in the public's head, and it's not fair and it's not right, and that's why we're here today to talk about it, I think.
Do you agree with what's being said, Ms. Han?
I think it's a combination of poor work and agenda. On surface, it's definitely a poor work. The Western media, including CNN or BBC, they were too eager to jump to the conclusion when it is China connected. This is the poor work they did. If they, do something harder and they really, honor their journalistic training and experiences, I think they need to find out the facts from various channels, not only the superficial evidence, and also why they were so eager to jump into the conclusion, because they had this agenda in mind and in their action to connect the bad things to China and also the Chinese government, to the regime.
So a combination of poor work and agenda, definitely. What do you think, Harvey?
Well, I think that there is some hidden agenda, but I think that this is a result of both sloppiness and competition. So when Ed was talking about newspapers, so the news cycle was very leisurely. But now you have to be out there first. It's a matter of milliseconds. You don't have a whole day or even a whole hour to get a story right. You want to be first. You want to have the attribution that you got this story, you own this story. And so what has to go? Sometimes it's the truth, because you don't get verification from a number of sources that this is true, and so on. So I think that we're a victim, in a way, of what we're on now, new media. So new media is very instantaneous. So the demands are so incredibly difficult for it. And in terms of China, and is there a bias? Yeah, I think there's somewhat of a bias from some people, not from everybody, not from every media. But I don't think when, about 20 years ago, there was a similar incident in England, in Dover, where 58 people were frozen to death in a similar kind of refrigeration truck. At that time, China was still in its, to quote Deng Xiaoping, hide your strength and bide your time mode. So China wasn't a big threat then. But now China is the nation that is second to America now, and so I think that it's that aspect of competition as well.
It's right on their radar. Now we've got a comment. This is from our viewer who are watching us. This is Yao CM Simo QMA from Sinaweibo. He says perception, or she says perception may be based on less understanding of current China. What do you think, Ms. Han?
Oh, that's a good one. Yes, I think this probably from someone who know about China or who's in China now. I think this can be also defined as a combination of, for the Western media to jump into the conclusion because they don't bother to understand the current China, and what's in their mind is still their perception of China, and they think their perception is right, and they think that's the fact, but which is not, which they need to verify the facts, and then they need to seek the truth. This is what it really tells about the truth about China. It's based on various facts.
What's your reaction?
Well, Yao Si Mo Q Ma, I would say, I'd say, yeah, that's probably true. I mean, listen, the perception is we're living in one of the most modern cities in the world in Beijing. In Shenzhen, you got to understand that the GDP for Shenzhen is slightly larger than Spain, is slightly smaller than Russia. The wages that are paid, so if this, I think that I think what she's alluded to here would be that the knee-jerk reaction is they're going there for economic reasons, and that there is money to be made here. There is good conditions for folks in Shenzhen, for example, and there's a lot of things happening within this country. It's the most greatest wealth that's been created in the history of the world. So the knee-jerk reaction, sometimes, maybe that's what she's alluding to, is the Western press assumes that, well, they're going to the UK for economic benefits, if that was a smuggling case, and that these would be Chinese, and that the perception for those that have not been to China is that it's a developing country, and that folks need to go elsewhere to find a job. So maybe their understanding is not with the current China, where there is economic success and prosperity here.
The BBC coverage we just mentioned is an example of that. The journalist from BBC, why do you think she would run with assumptions that these victims were Chinese, and then their families were so fearful to report they're missing, and then the regime must be so oppressive that they want to risk their life to leave the country? What does that say to you about their understanding and the perception of China?
It says to me that there seems to be some kind of bias in the media, and it pains me because the BBC used to be the gold standard for media, and Lord Reith, the first Director General of the BBC, had very high standards, and they set the definition of what good news and good media and good radio and television was all about, and that was to inform and educate and entertain in that order. And so we've moved away from that to biased coverage, and to coverage that is not absolutely accurate and not always checked out as it should be. So I think this is a bad thing that's happened with new technology, forcing us to be so quick in trying to deliver the news that sometimes truth is a casualty.
But do you give the journalist the benefit of the doubt? Was she just trying to connect the dots and just sloppy about it, or?
No, I don't give her the benefit of the doubt at all. I think that she's not well trained. I think that I would hope that the BBC would use this as a case study of what not to do. And to going forward to teach their journalists that there's a lot involved here, and that people stake what they know based on what the BBC says. So the BBC, in a way, because of its reputation, has a higher duty than other media to be as completely accurate, non-biased as possible.
This was actually quite shocking and eye-opening to me to see this is how she looked at China in this time, at this age. So my advice to her, Kirsty, if you're watching, my advice to you is please come to China, see it for yourself, and maybe talk to people yourself, and then make the judgments, right? Irresponsible accusations, they are not freedom of expression. You have every opinion, you have every right to voice your opinion, but at least get your facts straight. All right, here's another comments. This is from Twitter. It says, nobody has the right to accuse Chinese government, neither any other government, by anything without evidences. These accusations can actually be used against those who accuse China politically. Nice article, by the way. Edward, want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a lawyer, I would say that this Dizea Hussein here is, if I'm saying that, Dizea Hussein. So I agree. I mean, you can't really make a full judgment until all the evidence is in. I mean, the evidence wasn't in. The assumption was, and this is again maybe an idea about what the perception is Chinese. Asian people, they're all Chinese, and that there's this sort of misunderstanding about what to break it all down. Whereas the one thing I have to say is at least the British government and the police were coming down with what were fair assumptions, and we're trying to be from what I have seen, trying to be very cautious and very fair, which is what they should be. So what I saw was the very big difference.
The journalists jump on it.
Totally jump on it, and they're doing it for clicks and money.
Believed to be as facts,
right.
reporting them as evidence.
And as Harvey said, I mean, BBC is supposed to be reporting on facts, not on, opinions. And so they're just shooting off and saying it could be that, when we could watch the police ourselves and saying that it was undetermined what nation those folks were from.
So when did patience on waiting on factual investigation become worthless?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, please jump in.
I think I totally understand. The key word here is evidence. The principle 101 for a journalistic reporting should be evidence-based. But I totally understand, just as Harvey pointed out just now, about the pressure and the challenges, just journalistic reporting is facing.
They want to get big stories, they want to get it fast.
Exactly, in the wake of new media. But having said this, the evidence-based reporting cannot be compromised, especially when it is people connected, when victims are involved.
Right.
But when you think about the BBC, so when you unpack it, so BBC is run by the government, right? So it's out of Bush House, London, or it used to be, and so they are not driven by the almighty pound or dollar or sterling or whatever the heck it is, and so you would think that they would be able to get it right, as opposed to CNN, which is looking for an agenda on money-based, or in many cases now it's become political-based, but it also has to do with money. So that they couldn't get it right is really odd, I think. So
it's sad.
Yeah.
Not only odd, but it's sad because they're so well funded because they get a license fee from everybody with a radio or a TV. Right. So they have nothing but money, but still they can't manage to get it right. And I think that is really unfortunate.
And the CNN story, that was an interesting one. They first talk about illegal immigration, and on the back of that, they started to talk about Chinese legal migration with a very misleading headline. Right. So they brought up the fuzzy math, somehow making the connection between illegal immigration and legal migration. What do you think they're trying to get here? Is this kind of skewing of information done on purpose?
Still, this is like agenda-based reporting. Edward said that BBC is like a government-run and the CNN is more like interest party involved. But in my opinion, they are all interest party involved. Having said this, I do not say that maybe the Chinese media is also based on some interests, but still, I think it's okay. You have different interest party involved, but still, for the fourth estate, this is what the definition for Western media when media was first evolved into a public opinion leader and trend setting. So you still need to be based on the facts. The facts is the most the critically important, and based on those facts, you need to seek the truth. This is the principle, be it CNN or BBC.
Yeah, and to be fair, the people who made the trip legally to another country never deserved this kind of unfair label. But is China bashing now the new political correctness there?
I don't think it's a new political correctness. I think it's the fact that the world has changed, like I said before. So China has come into its own again after 100 years or more of humiliation and so on. So China and the U.S. we're the big countries now, and so we're both easy targets for different reasons, of course. And so I think that China is sticking out there, and so when you're sticking out, people take pot shots at you. But I do want to correct one thing. The story was not from CNN. The story was from CNN Philippines. CNN Philippines is a licensee of CNN. It's an independent operation. So while CNN has its pluses and minuses, I don't think that they should be tarred with this story. And there might be something going on between Sino-Philippine relations here that color the story in the way that it was done. But still, the story was done very poorly.
Now we've got another comment. This is from YouTube. Yoa Kok Lan says, "Bust those BBC busters who pin the tragedy to China without thinking twice." Edward?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there's little to no apology. There's little to no walk back with regards to it. I mean, they just plain got it wrong. I mean, and so what's interesting is that they don't want to be able to do that. And part of it.
What do you think should happen?
Well,
should they come out and apologize?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, or to make a correction. I mean, that's what journalists are supposed to do. We got it wrong, and but the other thing is that the first impression is what stays with the public, which is that it was Chinese nationals that were in there, and that's wrong. And there's enough vitriol with regards to U.S.-China trade relations and all these other things to add to the, to pile on with what's going on with China, and really with the run-up onto some of these meetings that are going to be taking place internationally between leaders. Again, this is coming from the British government directly with the BBC. So, I mean, yes, they should walk that back. There's no
How do you feel about the comments there?
I think this is a good advice, and I totally agree with Edward that there is apology needed here because of this, evidence-based journalistic reporting. Okay, it's understandable if you choose different headlines and you choose different focus in your cover stories of these events or incidents or accidents. It's okay, but it needs to still be evidence-based. For example, the APEC cancellation, I noticed that both from the Chinese media or from the American media, they only focus on whether or not the deal, the trade deal, this is the mini version of the trade deal, can be signed or not in the wake of the cancellation of APEC meeting. That is true. Okay, both interest parties involved in U.S. or Chinese media, they are more focused on the U.S.-China's trade deal rather than the APEC summit meeting itself. So it's understandable they put more focus on that, but it's truth-based, it's facts-based.
Right.
Yeah.
And the consequences. Generally speaking, what are the impact of these kind of speculative reports, Harvey?
Well, I think if they're not evidence-based, they are good and bad. Because it's just a speculation, and the speculation without evidence can lead to misunderstanding. It can lead actually to hatred and to very bad consequences between the two countries. So I think there's a special obligation now in terms of the bilateral relations, to fact check. There are sources like Snopes, Snopes.com, that check myths versus realities in a lot of stories. President Trump is keeping them very busy. But there's other stories that need to be checked as well. So I think if you're just doing the stories that are based on opinion and that are not labeled as opinion, this is not good journalism, and it's not good politics, and it's dangerous.
What would your message be, to people who are watching this or to journalists who are reporting these kind of stories? How should matters like these be handled?
Well, I mean, obviously it should be fact-based, not opinion-based. Okay, that's the number one. But here's the problem: when you're watching what I've been watching over the unpacking of what's happening with Mr. Trump and what's happening with the different networks that have a message to spin, good, bad, or indifferent, is that there is a direction that's coming from the management of these organizations in how they're to present the news. And I think that there's issues that are going on, that are not about this particular incident, and that they're trying to connect the dots between those two issues to try to cause some level of misunderstanding or instability in difficult times here. So is to be real journalists, be real reporters, and those are becoming a rare, almost like a unicorn. But it's very difficult to stand up against the administration within these corporations. So CNN has its own bias. I mean, as do most of the media for whatever reason. Now that wasn't what we had as growing up, which was it was fact based, and for those of us who are old enough to remember it, this would be objective reporting, and then the viewer could make an assumption one way or the other where they stood on an issue. Wow. Now they're feeding these kind of things in, and it's just it's the norm and not the exception. And so that a show like this to unpack and bust those headlines, I think is important to say where
that's what we
got
do
it
here
wrong.
at Headline Buster. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. That's all the time we have. So Ms. Han Hua from Chongyang Institute, Renmin University, Harvey Zoden, Senior Fellow from Center for China and Globalization, and Mr. Edward Lehman, Managing Director from Lehman, Lee and Shu LLP. And that does it for this edition of Headline Buster. Be sure to tune in next time, next Friday. I'll see you then. Have a good one.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, that was